This project's just going to be about whether speech codes should be allowed. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just go over all of the evidence for why they should be allowed. The question here is really what kind of speech should be protected. Now, the most shocking quote-unquote speech that has happened on a college campus would be at the University of Wisconsin. A fraternity called Zeta Beta Tau dressed up in blackface and proceeded to enact a slave auction, which obviously is completely unacceptable. And this is only one of, quote, countless incidents that have happened like this, and it is the increase of diversity that is typically blamed for the reason why these types of events happen. Speech codes are enacted to protect students from being victims of things like this. The question here is, obviously, this case that is cited should not be allowed. But there's also more controversial topics, like at the University of Michigan, students came after a professor for interpreting a novel in a way they thought was sexist and accused him of sexual harassment. So we just have to decide where the line is going to be drawn. And just a couple of past court decisions here in Beauharnais versus Illinois. This man blamed community problems on the black people in the community and handed out a flyer that said this to the community members. And the court ruled that because of the long history of horrible things that have happened and racist things that have happened in this country, the court ruled that this speech should not be protected because the line has to be drawn and there needs to be punishment for these types of things so that it can stop and we as a country can start being better. And also in Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, he was also passing out pamphlets, but these ones disrespected local authorities and different religious groups that were so severe that the court ruled them as fighting words, which we all know are not protected under the First Amendment. Just a few other additional information here. Just keeping in mind that, defining fighting words and what can lead to violence can be difficult, which is why speech codes are also difficult, and they're also common, because universities want to create a place where there's a positive learning environment. And although these types of speech may be protected in other places, like telling somebody that their interpretation of a novel is sexist wouldn't be a problem really in another place as far as authority goes. But school is a time where we should not only be learning something that relates to our career, but also about how to function in a world where there's differing opinions and ideas. And it should be a time where we are taught and if need be punished for saying inappropriate things. And FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education, reviewed a lot of speech codes and created this spectrum where if they got a red light, that just means their speech code. It said if you offend somebody, you're in trouble, which is far too restrictive on free speech. But they found that in the past 10 years, red light warnings have actually decreased by 50%. And the idea here is just that we can get better. So why get rid of speech codes? We can teach students what they need to know without overly restricting their free speech rights. And just moving on here, these are some evidences of why speech codes should not be enacted on college campuses. Couple court cases. In Healy versus James, they decided that the speech must make it difficult to go to work or school in peace. Obviously, in this case, we're talking about just school. And also these regulations must be content neutral. So if you have a club that's like pro-Nazi, you don't want them to be on campus, then no clubs can be on campus kind of thing. It has to be content neutral. From 3 to 5 p.m. in the flag circle, no clubs can be there. You can't just tell one club that they can't be there because you don't agree with what they're saying. And in Tinker versus Des Moines Independent Community School District, the important point here is just that you have to allow speech that causes people discomfort and feeling like their other person's speech was distasteful, because you're going to accompany that in the real world. So you can't just protect and put students in a bubble in that way. Next, we are going to talk about another court case where a student actually sued the university because he said that their speech code was far too broad, because it just said if you offend somebody, you're going to get in trouble. And these two statements are an example of what he cited to basically get rid of the speech code. He said if you're in class and somebody says, hey, there's not very many women in this class, this engineering class, it's because women just aren't as good at it. Obviously, that's going to be offensive to a lot of people, but it could also lead to a discussion about why that is instead of just ignoring that fact because of the speech code. So it just allows a lot of mind expanding about different issues and things that are happening in the real world. Some more additional information regarding this. These are very important quotes. Here it says a student's verbal battles should not be fought for them by administrators with speech codes. And then additionally, the same students who insist that they be treated as adults when it comes to their sexuality, drinking, and schoolwork beg to be treated like children when it comes to politics, speech, and controversy. They whine to the president or provost of the university to protect them from offensive speech instead of themselves trying to combat it in the marketplace of ideas. Here, it brings up the point that when students graduate and go on to a workplace, there's not going to be someone in charge that's going to step in for them if they get offended or hurt by something. College is a place where you learn to stand up for yourself and agree to disagree, even if you're offended or think that somebody is being, quote, distasteful. And so teaching them that they can be in this bubble by having someone stand up for them is just setting them up for failure in the real world. This is just a quick recap of the arguments here on both sides of the debate. And this quote here says, one person's vulgarity is another's lyric. And so that's just saying that this is all subjective. One person's going to be offended by something and another is not. But at the end of the day, speech codes should be enacted on college campuses because the First Amendment has never protected fighting words or speech that incites violence. And there certainly are things that people say on college campuses that could lead to those things. And so having a regulation isn't going to hurt anything as long as it's not too restrictive. It's also teaching students to be sensitive to other people that are different from them and protects other students from bigotry and harmfulness as well. And also because, we can keep working on creating speech codes that are acceptable in the light of the Constitution. But speech codes should also not be enacted on college campuses because it would, quote, stifle intellectual freedom and trample upon First Amendment rights. It also would teach students that they can avoid discomfort by people that offend them in everyday life. And also, students would benefit from challenging their frames of thought and coming into contact with ideas they disagree with. It allows students to express those ideas in school and then also correct the incorrect ones about racism, homophobia, etc. And so that when they get out into society, they're better for it because of those conversations that they had. Students need to learn how to stand up for themselves, and universities are not exempt from the First Amendment at the end of the day. So in conclusion, speech codes should not be implemented on college campuses. Just going back to the first slide, at the University of Wisconsin, when that horrible thing happened where those students enacted the slave auction, that's an action that should not be allowed. But action and speech is different. If somebody says something that's offensive, even if it's horribly, racist or sexist, at the end of the day, there's no laws that are against that in our society, and colleges shouldn't be able to create laws that wouldn't be protected in the real world. It's simply just not legal, and it restricts the freedom to learn, not just when it comes to learning about what happens when they go and work in communications or psychology, but also it restricts the freedom to learn from people that have different ideas and to stand up for their ideas in a respectful way. And at the end of the day, these rules are simply subjective, and colleges should be a place where there's free reign for freedom of speech, but there is not free reign for horrible action.